Hi there, my name is Leanne Alexander, coming to you today from Pentecostal Publishing House with another teacher training video. Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of understanding your students. Now, if we were talking about a writing video, I would stress what many writing programs stress, and that's the most important fundamental of writing is know thy audience. You have to write in such a way that recognizes the needs of your audience. I believe it's very similar to what we should do as teachers. We want to understand our students, where they're coming from, what their needs are, so we can adapt our teaching and make it applicable to real life today. So I want to back up. Of course, we could talk about building relationships within your own classroom, and we'll do that in other videos. But I want to back up today and talk more generally about the congregations in our church and some characteristics. Now, for a long time, we have made a stereotype of millennials, and there are probably reasons that we've done that, and I won't get into that. But I want to suggest today that we really need to take a broad look at the congregations and at the people in the classes we teach within those congregations. Millennials would be only one group, one segment of our church population. So when we talk so much about millennials, we probably should step back and look more broadly. If you take a look at research from the Pew Research Center and from the Barna Group, millennials probably are the parents of the children in your classes. Now, that may sound surprising because we've used millennial to indicate a youth, but if you look at any research out there, really millennials would be the group that are probably the parents, the young parents in your church, and then Gen Z is probably the group that would be in your youth group, and then Generation Alpha is the name that's given now to our children born 2010 and on. So your 8-year-olds and down would be Generation Alpha, that new group, and sociologists have argued about what will be the name, what's next after millennials. Well, that's Gen Z. We have some very clear research out there on Gen Z. And then next up will be Generation Alpha. So what I want to do is I want to target right now Gen Z, because that'll be your youth group. So those of you teaching youth, this applies. And then for our children's teachers, we're going to see some of those same characteristics just manifesting in different ways. So I'm going to cite the Barna Group. They released a study in January, and I've purchased that and looked at that, and you can easily Google Barna Group in Gen Z, and you'll find all kinds of research. And I'll make the disclaimer with any study, we've got the possibility of variance, so to say that this is exactly how all people everywhere think and act and believe, of course we recognize the possibility of variance. And I'll also say that these statistics, it's not a crutch to say, oh, well, that's just the way this group is, and that's just it. We understand that we're going to minister to people, and we're not going to use research to say, oh, well, we won't do that. But again, I think we want to understand who we're teaching to. So let's just look specifically at Gen Z. First of all, it's really, really rocking Protestant and Catholic church leaders, because from this study released in January by the Barna Group, we have seen the rise of atheism in our youngest group, our Gen Z group, double. It's up to about 13% from this study of across the U.S., those who would identify as atheists. Now, if you watch the graph, you see that, again, it upticks with that youngest generation. And again, we put some disclaimers in there. Every generation's elders have looked to the youth and had concerns. But here's why I think that statistic matters. Because when you look at the screen time that Gen Z is the time they're spending on their screens, that's where this becomes an issue, and why I think these statistics matter. I don't want to dismiss these statistics, because if the research is holding true, and I saw a recent USA Today poll that matched these numbers, Barna Group is saying that 56% of Gen Z, our U.S. teenagers, are spending 4 or more hours on their phone every day. And it may extend beyond phone, but we'll say daily screen time. 25%, 1 in 4 of our teenagers spend more than 8 hours a day on their devices. Now, that's important because what sociologists are telling us is, now we talk about attention span, and a good rule of thumb is for whatever age a person is, that's about how many minutes you can do an attention span. That doesn't totally hold, because with Gen Z, what we're being told by sociologists is that you have an 8-second, and they're using the term filter, not attention span, because with such an influx of media, and you swipe from, oh, my friend went and saw the pyramids, to, oh, my friend just caught a fish that was this long, and there's just this constant bombardment of all these exploits that people are doing. What's important is to realize is that Gen Z teenagers are creating a filter system. And so in the same way that they're swiping through social media, They're listening to us in the classroom, and you really do have about 8 seconds, not just to capture their attention, but to show them that your information matters in their life, so that then that filter says, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to connect here. Now, I don't use any of this as a crutch or a reason to just say, oh no, it's hopeless. I don't believe any of that. But let me add one more statistic that alarms me. In a Barna study, and this is reaching back to 2016, but in a study from the Barna Group, not Christians, but just a general swath of U.S. teenagers, they were asked the questions of 10 different moral attributes, actions. And in ranking that study, only 32% of survey respondents said that viewing anything pornographic was usually or even always wrong. So if I'm doing the math right, we've got 68% of U.S. teenagers who do not believe that viewing pornography is wrong. When you take that statistic and you add it to the statistic that says they're spending, over half of our teenagers are spending 4 or more hours a day on their digital devices, you can see that we are at a point where we could potentially have a crisis of how we let media affect us. That's the world that our students are coming into our classrooms from. And again, not all of you are teaching teenagers, but I would argue that either direction from that Gen Z, we're going to see some very similar characteristics. I think our adults are spending a lot of time on screens, and I know our children are spending a lot of time on their screens. Generation Alpha, this new next generation that we're just starting to see just the very earliest bit of research on them. We're anticipating we're going to have a lot of these same characteristics, and then we're going to have increasing isolation and loneliness as well, because as we retreat into our digital world and we spend more time there, we're losing more person-to-person contact. Now, with all those statistics, I refuse to just say, oh no, it's hopeless. I'm not being negative with this. I'm recognizing where our world at large is. And I'm saying this to say, first of all, we know the promise from Scripture. His truth endureth to all generations. His mercy is on them that fear him from generation to generation. We have hope because we know God will always have a people. He cares very much generation to generation. But it's incumbent upon us as teachers to make sure that we're doing our very best to make those connections, to get past that filter in this digital world. It's going to mean several things, and we'll have future videos that talk about this. Number one, we have to make sure that our teaching applies to this world that's so digitally engaged. We need to make some teaching application from principles that talk about how to deal with a digital world. We need to give our students some very specific instruction and some very specific application about how to live out Christianity in a digital age, in a digital world. So I encourage you, if in your teaching you have a general teaching principle that you're ending your class with, take that a step further. How does that apply to students who are spending so much time on their digital devices? How do we live out those principles that we're talking about? Do some work to make that connection beyond where your teaching principle is landing. Secondly, I believe that the importance of praying for our students is more important than ever. If you're not taking the time during your week to call your student's name in prayer, I want to encourage you to do that. Find a time to pray specifically for your students during the week. And then thirdly, let's model for our students how to be apostolic in an age and in a world that seems so overwhelming. I share these characteristics because I think it's important we know where our students are coming from. We know the world they're living in. Whether you're teaching adults, whether you're teaching youth, whether you're teaching children, these statistics matter to all of us, because it suggests we've got to find a way to engage our students who live in such a digital world, who live in a time where what we once would have thought would be moral absolutes are now very susceptible to changing. That study I mentioned, recycling is more morally imperative than how we view media. That's a big deal. We have to recognize where our students are, and we've got to engage them with real-life applications. So we'll talk more about this in future videos, but I want to encourage you, take a look this week at your students. Where are they coming from? What do they believe? How are we praying for them? How are we connecting to them? How are we making real-life application? We can do this, and God's going to help us.